In the year 7 AD, a young Germanic warrior named Arminius stood at the crossroads of destiny, about to ignite a rebellion that would shake the foundations of the Roman Empire and change the course of European history forever. This is the story of how one man's betrayal would lead to Rome's most catastrophic military defeat. For decades, Rome had been the unstoppable force of the ancient world. The legions marched wherever they pleased, conquering lands from the sun-baked deserts of Africa to the misty forests of Germania. The Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents, and Emperor Augustus sat upon his throne in Rome, believing his empire would last for eternity. Roman soldiers, disciplined and battle-hardened, had crushed the Gauls, subdued the Iberians, and brought civilization to what they called the barbarian lands. Their engineering marvels, their roads, their aqueducts, and their laws represented the pinnacle of human achievement in that era. Beyond the Rhine River lay Germania, a vast wilderness of dense forests, treacherous swamps, and scattered tribal settlements. The Romans called the people who lived there barbarians, primitive warriors who knew nothing of Roman sophistication. But Rome wanted Germania. They wanted its resources, its land, and most importantly, they wanted to push their border to the Elbe River, creating a shorter, more defensible frontier. For years, Roman governors had been working to transform Germania into a Roman province, imposing taxes, demanding tribute, and attempting to replace ancient Germanic customs with Roman law. The Germanic tribes were a proud people, fierce warriors who valued their freedom above all else. They lived in scattered communities, each tribe with its own customs and leaders. The Carusi, the Marsi, the Chatti, the Bructeri, these tribes rarely united, often fighting amongst themselves over territory and honor. Rome exploited these divisions masterfully, playing one tribe against another, offering alliances to some while crushing others. By 7 AD, much of Germania between the Rhine and Weser rivers appeared pacified. Roman forts dotted the landscape, and a Roman governor named Publius Quinctilius Varus administered the region with confidence. Everything seemed under control, and Rome believed Germania would soon be as Roman as Gaul. But beneath the surface, resentment simmered, and one man was about to channel that resentment into an explosion of violence that would echo through the centuries. Arminius was not an ordinary Germanic warrior. Born around 18 BC into the noble family of the Carusi tribe, he represented something unprecedented in Germanic history, a man who walked in both worlds. As a young boy, Arminius had been taken to Rome, either as a hostage to ensure his father's loyalty or as part of a diplomatic arrangement. This practice was common in Roman foreign policy, taking the sons of tribal leaders and raising them in Roman culture, turning potential enemies into loyal servants of the empire. In Rome, Arminius received an education that few Germanic people could imagine. He learned Latin, studied Roman military tactics, and absorbed the sophisticated political strategies that made Rome the dominant power of the age. He wasn't just educated. He was given Roman citizenship, an extraordinary honor for someone born beyond the empire's borders. More remarkably, he was granted equestrian rank, placing him among Rome's elite classes. The Romans gave him a new name alongside his Germanic one, and he served as an officer in the Roman auxiliary forces, commanding Germanic cavalry units. He fought for Rome in campaigns across the empire, proving himself brave, intelligent, and utterly loyal. To the Romans, Arminius was proof that their system worked, that even barbarians could be civilized and made useful to the empire. But Arminius never forgot where he came from. Despite his Roman education and military service, something inside him remained Germanic. Perhaps he witnessed how Roman officials treated his people with contempt, or perhaps he always planned to use his Roman knowledge against them. Whatever the reason, by 7 AD, when Arminius returned to Germania as a trusted advisor to Governor Varus, he had made a fateful decision. He would betray Rome, unite the fractious Germanic tribes, and drive the legions back across the Rhine forever. The challenge before him was immense. The Germanic tribes distrusted each other almost as much as they distrusted Rome, convincing them to set aside generations of rivalries and fight together required extraordinary diplomatic skill. Arminius traveled secretly between tribes, using his knowledge of Roman tactics and strategy as proof that he could lead them to victory. He spoke of freedom, of ancient Germanic honor, and of the unbearable humiliation of paying tribute to foreign masters. Slowly, carefully, he wove together a conspiracy that would soon explode into open rebellion. To understand why the Germanic tribes followed Arminius into rebellion, we must understand what life was like under Roman occupation in 7 AD. Governor Publius Quinctilius Varus ruled Germania with the arrogance typical of Roman administrators who had never faced serious resistance. Varus came from a distinguished Roman family and had previously governed Syria, a wealthy eastern province where Roman authority was firmly established. He approached Germania with the same assumptions, believing the tribes were pacified and ready to be transformed into obedient Roman subjects. Varus imposed Roman law on people who had lived by their own customs for centuries. He held court like a Roman magistrate, sitting in judgment over tribal disputes that had traditionally been settled by Germanic councils. He collected taxes with the efficiency of the Roman bureaucracy, extracting wealth from communities that had never before paid tribute to any central authority. Roman merchants followed the legions, establishing trading posts and introducing Roman goods, Roman currency, and Roman economic practices that disrupted traditional Germanic society. Roman engineers surveyed the land for roads, and Roman architects drew up plans for towns built in the Roman style. For the Germanic people, this represented not just political domination, but cultural annihilation. Their sacred groves, where they had worshipped their gods for generations, were viewed with suspicion by Romans who saw only primitive superstition. Their warrior culture, which valued individual bravery and personal honor above all else, clashed fundamentally with Roman discipline and collective organization. Young Germanic men who had expected to prove themselves in battle found themselves either conscripted into Roman auxiliary units or reduced to paying taxes to foreign masters. Tribal leaders who had once commanded respect found their authority undermined by Roman officials who dismissed them as barbarian chieftains. The Roman military presence was overwhelming. 3 full legions occupied Germania in 7 AD, the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions, comprising roughly 15,000 heavily armed professional soldiers. These weren't raw recruits, but experienced veterans who had fought across the empire. Supporting them were auxiliary units, including cavalry and specialized troops, bringing the total Roman military force to perhaps 20,000 men. They were equipped with superior weapons, armor, and siege equipment. They built fortified camps connected by military roads, creating a network of power that seemed impossible to challenge. Yet this apparent strength masked a crucial weakness. The Romans had grown complacent, believing Germania was already conquered when in reality, they occupied a hostile land where death lurked in every forest. Throughout 7 AD, while Governor Varus went about his daily administration, Arminius moved like a shadow through Germania, forging the conspiracy that would destroy 3 Roman legions. The challenge was enormous. Germanic tribes had been fighting each other for generations, and blood feuds ran deep. The Carusi had ancient grievances against the Chatti. The Marsi distrusted the Bructeri, and smaller tribes viewed larger ones with suspicion. Rome had exploited these divisions expertly, ensuring that Germanic disunity prevented any unified resistance. Arminius needed to overcome centuries of mistrust in a matter of months. Arminius used every advantage his Roman education had given him. He understood Roman military organization better than any Germanic leader had before. He knew how legions marched, how they made camp, how they fought, and crucially, where they were vulnerable. He shared this knowledge with tribal leaders in secret meetings held deep in the forests, far from Roman eyes. He explained that Roman soldiers, despite their fearsome reputation, relied on formation fighting and open terrain. In the dense Germanic forests, on ground of their choosing, the tribes could negate Rome's advantages. He painted a picture of victory that seemed impossible, yet tantalizing. The complete destruction of Varus's army and the liberation of Germania. The conspiracy required perfect timing and absolute secrecy. Arminius maintained his position as Varus's trusted advisor, dining with the governor, offering counsel, and providing intelligence about Germanic affairs. Varus trusted him completely, never suspecting that the cultured, Romanized officer who spoke perfect Latin was simultaneously organizing the greatest betrayal in Roman history. Arminius walked a tightrope, knowing that one slip, one suspicious Roman officer, one tribal leader who wavered in his commitment, could expose everything and lead to his immediate execution. As spring turned to summer in 7 AD, the pieces fell into place. Tribal leaders committed their warriors to the cause, swearing oaths in their sacred groves to fight together until the Romans were driven from Germanic soil. Scouts identified the perfect location for an ambush, a narrow passage through the Teutoburg Forest where the Roman column would be stretched thin and vulnerable. Arminius prepared a deception that would lure Varus and his legions into the trap. Everything was ready. All that remained was to wait for the right moment, and that moment was fast approaching. The stage was set for one of the most decisive battles in human history. As summer faded into early autumn of 7 AD, Arminius set his trap. He brought Varus reports of a minor tribal uprising in a distant region. Nothing serious, just some troublesome villages that needed to be reminded of Roman authority. It was exactly the kind of routine military operation that Varus had conducted before. The governor, trusting his loyal Germanic advisor completely, decided to march his legions to suppress this rebellion before winter made campaigning impossible. It was a decision that would doom 15,000 men. Varus ordered the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions to prepare for march. These were not just soldiers, but a mobile community. Roman legions on campaign traveled with baggage trains containing supplies, equipment, siege weapons, and camp followers, including families, merchants, and slaves. The column stretched for miles, a massive procession that moved slowly through the Germanic landscape. Varus was confident, even casual about the expedition. After all, Germania seemed pacified, and he had Arminius and his Germanic cavalry riding alongside as guides and allies. What could possibly go wrong? Arminius guided the Roman column toward the Teutoburg Forest, a region of dense woodland, steep hills, and treacherous swamps. He assured Varus that this route, though difficult, was the fastest way to reach the rebellious villages. The Romans, trusting their guide, entered terrain that nullified every advantage their disciplined formations usually provided. The forest closed in around them, forcing the column to stretch even thinner along narrow paths. Rain began to fall, turning the ground to mud and making the Romans' heavy equipment a burden rather than an asset. Soldiers struggled to maintain formation as they pushed through undergrowth and navigated around ancient trees. As the column penetrated deeper into the forest, Arminius made his move. He quietly slipped away with his Germanic cavalry, claiming he needed to scout ahead or gather allied tribal forces. Varus suspected nothing. Arminius had served Rome faithfully for years. Why would he betray them now? The Roman governor pressed forward, intent on reaching the supposed rebellion, unaware that every step took his legions farther from safety and deeper into a carefully prepared killing ground. Behind them, escape routes were being sealed. Ahead of them, thousands of Germanic warriors gathered in the forest shadows, weapons ready, waiting for their signal to attack. The greatest ambush in Roman history was about to begin. The attack came like a thunderstorm, sudden and devastating. One moment, the Roman column trudged through the forest in the rain. The next, Germanic warriors erupted from the trees with terrifying war cries. Javelins and spears flew from the undergrowth, striking Roman soldiers who couldn't see their attackers. The legions tried to form defensive formations, but the terrain made it impossible. Trees and mud broke up their lines, and the relentless attacks from the forest kept them constantly off balance. This was warfare like the Romans had never experienced. Not a pitched battle on open ground, but a running nightmare through hostile forest. Arminius was everywhere, directing the tribal forces with the tactical brilliance of his Roman training. He knew exactly where the Roman column was weakest, where the officers would be, where panic would spread fastest. The Germanic warriors used the forest perfectly, attacking suddenly, then melting back into the trees before the Romans could counterattack. They targeted officers specifically, knowing that without leadership, the disciplined Roman formations would collapse into chaos. They seized the baggage train, capturing supplies and equipment while demoralizing the Roman soldiers who watched their possessions being plundered. For 3 days, the ambush continued. The Romans tried desperately to break out of the forest, but every path led to more attackers, more impossible terrain, more death. Varus, realizing too late that he had been betrayed, tried to rally his men, but the situation was hopeless. Legionaries who had never feared any enemy in open battle found themselves hunted like animals through the German wilderness. The rain never stopped, soaking everyone, making fires impossible, turning armor into a waterlogged burden. Soldiers abandoned their heavy equipment just to keep moving, but it made no difference. The Germanic warriors knew every path, every hiding spot, every escape route, and they sealed them all. By the third day, the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions had ceased to exist as fighting forces. Thousands lay dead in the forest, their bodies stripped of armor and weapons. Varus, wounded and knowing capture meant torture and humiliation, fell on his sword, choosing a Roman death over Germanic captivity. Some soldiers were captured and would later be sacrificed to Germanic gods in brutal rituals. Only a handful of survivors managed to escape back to Roman-held territory, bringing news of the catastrophe to the empire. News of the disaster reached Emperor Augustus in Rome like a thunderbolt. The man who had brought peace to the Roman world, who had transformed the Republic into an empire, who had expanded Rome's borders to their greatest extent, received reports that 3 entire legions had been annihilated. Ancient sources tell us that Augustus was so distraught, he banged his head against the palace walls, crying out, "Quinctilius Varus, legionis retha," which means, "Varus, give me back my legions." The numbers were never used again. Rome never reformed the 17th, 18th, or 19th legions, leaving a permanent gap in the legion numbering system as a memorial to the disaster. The defeat in Teutoburg Forest, which would occur in 9 AD as the culmination of the conspiracy formed in 7 AD, marked the end of Roman expansion in Germania. Rome would make punitive expeditions across the Rhine in the following years, but they never again attempted to permanently occupy the region between the Rhine and Elbe rivers. The frontier stabilized at the Rhine, and Germania remained free from Roman rule. This had profound consequences for European history. The lands that became modern Germany developed along different cultural lines than Romanized Western Europe, creating a divide that would shape European politics for millennia. Arminius became a legendary figure among Germanic peoples, remembered as a liberator who united fractious tribes against a common enemy. Yet his story didn't end in triumph. After defeating Rome, the tribal alliances he forged began to fracture. Ancient rivalries resurfaced, and eventually, Arminius was assassinated by his own people in 21 AD, apparently killed by relatives who feared he was becoming too powerful. He died at roughly 37 years old, having changed the course of history, but unable to create a lasting Germanic unity. The events of 7 AD, when Arminius first organized the conspiracy that would explode into open rebellion, remind us that empires, no matter how powerful, are vulnerable to determined resistance. Rome, which seemed invincible, learned that conquest requires more than military might. It requires either the consent of the conquered or eternal vigilance. The Germanic tribes learned that unity, however temporary, could achieve what seemed impossible. And history learned that sometimes One person in the right place at the right time can alter the destiny of nations and shape the world for centuries to come.